you want to get answered today? You can put those in there. Welcome, welcome everybody. We're gonna let everybody arrive in our virtual Zoom room. I'm Liz Paul. I'm the coordinator for Bren. Excellent. Looks like we've got some people that maybe haven't come to a Bren program before. Hi, Ken. You, of course, are a regular. It's very awesome to see you. Excellent, excellent. Yeah, just as you come on in, introduce yourself in the chat, say hi. Helps us kind of know who we're reaching out to, who's coming, who's participating. I'm going to say that this program is being recorded and we'll get it up onto the Bren. We have a YouTube channel and we'll get it up onto the YouTube channel. And so it'll be available to watch again if you want or to share with other people. This is a program today on regulatory alphabet soup, all the different agencies and the regulations that apply when you want to do work in or adjacent to the Boise River. Or any river for that matter. Some of the rules, of course, apply statewide or nationwide. Welcome, welcome. We have some great guests today, and our host today is going to be Mike Dimmick with Flood Control District 10. All right, so I'm Liz Paul, the coordinator for the Boise River Enhancement Network. And I want to welcome everybody here today. The Boise River Enhancement Network is a local nonprofit organization. It's directed and most of the work is done by volunteers. It's really a labor of love for a lot of people. It's group's going to be coming into their 10th year this year. So you can see the mission statement there: network of people that live, work, and play in the Boise River, dedicated to promoting the ecological enhancement of the Boise River, the lower Boise River, from Lucky Peak down to the Snake. And it's all about having a healthy Boise River. And we're talking about water quality, riparian and wetland habitat, in-stream habitat, and also geomorphology. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat there. It's good to see everybody coming in. So as a nonprofit, Boise River Enhancement Network depends on our stakeholders and supporters for our financial survival. So we've got a web page there. If you're unfamiliar with us, we've got a lot of things on our web. Sorry about that. Including a link, we have a web page, including a link on how to donate. And we really appreciate donations. It's free to join the Boise River Enhancement Network, and you'll get some emails announcing events like this and other stewardship activities we do, and on the blogs that we create and get onto our website. And so we would love it if you would also go to the website and join if you are not already a member. And for those who are just joining us, we are asking people to introduce themselves in the chat. We so miss being able to walk into a room and say hi to people, and you get to know people who come to these things. Over the course of a few months, you see familiar faces, and we really hope that we'll be able to get back to doing more of that in 2021. But we're just gonna have to rely on the chat for today. Let me announce our upcoming brown bag lunch program on February 26th. This is going to be an incredible program. Caldwell Mayor Nancolis is going to tell the story of Indian Creek. And if you're not familiar with this amazing story, you know, this creek, which is a natural tributary of the Boise River. It's been augmented a bit over the years, but it is a natural tributary, and it was buried underground because it smelled so bad, had so many rats and garbage, and it was just really a mess. So they put it underground in Caldwell, and but now there's that picture of it. A big section of it has been daylighted. It's a prime all-season destination, and Mayor Nancolis oversaw this process. And so we're really glad to be able to give him the podium to talk about it. Oh, yep. Okay, so today we're talking about regulations in regards to doing projects. We're specifically talking about the lower Boise River, but a lot of the regulations apply to all rivers. Okay, you've probably figured out what this is by now. This is Whitewater Park Phase 2 in the city of Boise. As you can see, they diverted all the water out of the Boise River Channel in order to create all those fun features that are now getting used a lot. This is another project. This is the Garden City Pedestrian Bridge that was that's down below Glenwood. And so this project also needed permits. Here's some bank stabilization work after the high water of 2017 that the city of Boise did and needed permits for that. And here's another bank stabilization. This is in Garden City, although managed by the city of Boise. And so this is just a small scattering of the kinds of projects, pictures that I had that require a permit. And I'm going to turn it over to our host for today now, Mike Dimmick. Mike is the manager of Flood Control District 10. And if anybody has had experience, a lot of experience with permitting and regulations, it's Mike and Flood 10. So take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks for the invite today, and welcome everybody that's on the call today. Yes, I'm the district manager for Flood District 10. We run from the upper end of Garden City, about 50th Street, to the steel bridge, the one-lane bridge down just above the freeway in Caldwell. So it's a pretty good stretch of the river. And this is actually last October was our 50th anniversary for Flood District being in Idaho here. So we're about to celebrate that if we can. We do operate under permits. The work that we do, our responsibility is flood mitigation. Basically, we try to keep the channel in shape for handling the spring runoffs. We do have input to development and other folks that are working along the river. In the event of a flood fight, we do get involved as far as an advisory capacity, normally for the fire folks who head up the incident command system when it comes time to deal with a flood in the area like we had in 2017. We work with Idaho Department of Water Resources, stream channel alteration permit for doing our maintenance work. We also assist a lot of landowners along the river when they've got serious erosion problems. We assist them with joint permit applications with the Water Resources and Corps of Engineers so they can get permitted to do some bank repairs, much like you see in the photos that Liz showed us. DEQ is part of that. We have an MOU with DEQ for doing our burning, for our debris burning for the piles that we generate with our river maintenance. And we also do cooperative work with Idaho Fish and Game, especially in some of the last couple of years. We're starting to get more involved with them with some projects, more recently some side channel projects. And we hope to keep that going and expanding that program going into the future. I would just say that in about the last 5 or 6 years, the flood district has changed the way we do our work in the river. We don't take as much debris or take as many trees out as they used to in prior years. We're trying to keep a canopy and we're trying to keep shading in the river. And that seems to be paying off with some of the permitting processes that we're going through. So what I would like to do, you know, just historically, the river's changed an awful lot. Since before the dams were in, the average channel width of the river was pretty close to 900 feet. And now it's about 140 feet as an average width. So our channel is restricted much more than it was when it was a fully natural wild river. And that's due to the dams and the reservoirs. So we have a more limited area, and that calls for more permitting and more protection of the area that we end up working in. So with that, I guess I would like to turn it over to the speakers that we have listed. We have Jason Boal with us today from Ada County. We have Jenah Thornborrow from Garden City, and Liz Paul, and we have Kati from DEQ is going to talk with us today too, Kati Carberry. So Jason, if you're ready, we'll go, but if you're not, I'll start with Jenah.
Nope, I'm good to go.
Good to go. Okay, we'll go ahead and start with you, and then we'll follow you with Jenah, and then back to Liz. So take it away.
All right, I've got a quick PowerPoint here. Get it pulled up so everybody can see. For those of you who I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, I am Jason Boal. I am the Deputy Director with Ada County Development Services. I am the floodplain administrator for Ada County, co-floodplain administrator for Ada County, I should say. Zach Kirk, our county engineer, is also on in this meeting. He does most of the heavy lifting when it comes to permitting. As far as on the technical side and on the engineering side. Our role, Ada County's role and local government's role with floodplain management really comes through the National Flood Insurance Program. And in this flood insurance program, there's really three main elements to it. One is the insurance, being able to provide flood insurance for property owners that own property that have structures in the floodplain. The second piece of it is mapping. Both of those elements really are run and spearheaded by federal entities or the insurance companies themselves. So FEMA does all of the mapping, and they are also heavily involved in that insurance in the insurance aspect. From a local perspective, we don't deal much with the insurance. We can answer some questions. There are some programs where we can help reduce premium costs, which I'll talk about at the end of this. When it comes to mapping, we're more heavily involved, or I guess more involved with the mapping, where we work with property owners on projects to revise the maps for their individual properties, and then also work on larger projects like just happened with the complete remapping of the Boise River, working with FEMA, trying to obtain better data and providing that information to FEMA so that the most accurate maps for insurance purposes can be produced. And I think that's a key element. Oftentimes when we're talking about these maps, we think of, oh, this is where maps or the flooding is going to happen. That's where what these maps show. But the reality is these maps are used for risk determination and ultimately for insurance purposes. And so it's just one of the small nuances in this flood insurance program that I think oftentimes gets overlooked of what the real purpose of those maps are. Local government's real role comes in with floodplain management, the third aspect of this National Flood Insurance Program. We are required to adopt minimal standards, and we have the option of adopting higher standards. We are required to adopt these standards so that flood insurance is available in our communities. If we were to not adopt these standards, anybody who owned property or owned a structure in Ada County would not be eligible for flood insurance through the federal programs. We are seeing more and more private flood insurance becoming available, but generally for the last 30 to 50 years, flood insurance has come through this federal program. And just I've got some brief numbers to share. I guess in Ada County, there are 378 flood insurance policies, just so you can get an idea of perspective of what it is we're talking about. The benefit of us adopting these standards coming through on the insurance side. And I mentioned there is this community rating system program where counties and cities can adopt higher standards and do certain things to help lower the premiums for those that have flood insurance. So for example, Ada County is currently a Class 7, which provides a discount of 15% to those policies in the special flood hazard area, and then 5% for those flood insurance policies outside. When it comes to maps, FEMA produces the maps with their data. We have the opportunity to help provide additional data. We also have the opportunity to require development that is modifying the river or modifying the floodplain to send their data to FEMA so that we can have the most up-to-date information available, and I guess the best, so the maps can reflect risk more accurately with that better data. And there are opportunities for, like I said, for property owners to modify their whole parcel or a portion of their parcel to adjust their insurance requirements and insurance rating. Floodplain management really is I think where we see our role. We're excited about it. We enjoy doing this. We do work closely with multiple agencies. IDWR does have the state floodplain coordinator, flood insurance NFIP coordinator, and she does provide excellent assistance to local communities and organizations. But really, it's the local government's role to review, permit, and to track all development that happens in this special flood hazard area along the rivers and creeks throughout the community. Most of those regulations are found in land use codes. Some of the regulations are found in building codes. Each community handles it a little bit differently, but generally that's where they're found. And the reason for these local regulations really is to protect life and property, and to maintain the natural function of the floodplains, and then to lastly, to minimize risk. So, and to give you some examples of these regulations, any development that happens in the floodplain requires a permit. So that includes excavating, it includes building structures, grading, really anything, any man-made change to the land requires a consultation with us and possibly a permit. There are certain regulations that we work with the irrigation districts to allow them some maintenance through a more simplified program, permitting process. But even those, it is a permit that is required for any man-made change to the floodplain. There are different, I guess, standards of regulation within the floodplain, because we have this large 100-year floodplain, and then the smaller portion, the floodway, which in a flood event, in a 100-year flood event, is where the water is going to be moving. We do have different standards for those. In Ada County, we don't allow development of any kind in the floodway. And then there are, I guess, development in the floodplain is allowed with higher standards as well. But within the floodway, we don't allow any development. So some of the other example regulations that we've adopted in Ada County and other communities in the region have adopted, we do require compensatory storage. So even though we allow development in the floodplain, if you're going to be adding fill, which is going to, if it changes how that functions, we do require compensatory storage. So if you're bringing fill in, you've got to create more area for that compensatory storage somewhere in the floodplain, somewhere in the area where you're developing. We've also adopted a higher standard for roads and driveways so that in a flood event, we don't have emergency access vehicles and residents driving through water. This is something that we've just recently adopted. It's a recent change. So we are requiring all new roads, bridges, and driveways to be 1.5 feet above the base flood elevation so that they can function in a flood event. Some of the other higher standards, most people aren't aware of that. In Ada County, we actually have adopted floodplain standards for the foothills and hillside tributaries. So where we have drainages coming down out of the foothills, even though it isn't mapped as a floodplain on the FEMA maps, we consider those floodplain and have to meet the standards of the floodplain. So any development that happens in the foothill, this is one of the things that Zach and his team will take a look at and determine how much drainage is coming through, how much area is draining into this this drainage, and then what standards need to be met to meet our floodplain standards for that development. We do require freeboard, so the elevation above the base flood elevation, the lowest floor of a home has to be 1.5 feet above. And we've chose 1.5 feet. One, provides a benefit if there is a flood event. Hopefully the structure is raised enough so that it won't get wet. But secondly, there is a huge benefit when it comes to flood insurance policies. The homeowner will get credit for being 2 feet above. They actually round up. So when it comes to their policy premiums, they get a discount because we've adopted the higher standard. And then they've built to that higher standard. It's considered 2 feet above for insurance rating purposes. And then finally, one thing, another regulation that we've adopted that we work with homeowners on and property owners along the river, specifically the Boise River, is we have adopted a greenway overlay. And so we don't allow any structures within 100 feet of the floodway, sorry. The floodplain, that boundary kind of varies, but from the floodway, it's 100 feet. We don't allow any structures. Ideally, this is to help ensure that the floodplain will function properly, that we're not building right up against the river. And it opens up the opportunity to keep the river natural, to keep it functioning, and then for future projects, possibly with the obtaining easements for things like the green belt along the river. So we do require, like I said before, anybody who's developing in the floodplain to come and talk to us, consult with us. Some projects, larger projects, we require pre-development modeling where they actually have to determine what it's going to look like. Smaller projects, we just require that they meet the minimal standards that we've adopted, which are higher standards than what FEMA requires. And during construction, we do inspections, both during and post-construction, to ensure that the development was designed and is functioning as it was designed properly. And then afterwards, I think one of the most important pieces I mentioned earlier, we do require that the data is sent to FEMA so that the maps can be updated to show that the river has changed or the floodplain has changed, and those can be accounted in the official maps. So that is my presentation. I don't know, Mike, are we doing questions now, or are we going to save them for later?
This is Mike. I think we might want to get through the speakers and then come back to the chat room to answer the questions. Otherwise, we may cut the last speaker off a little bit. So Liz, if that's all right with you, I'd like to move on to Jenah next, if that is all right with everybody.
Make it so. Thanks a lot, Jason, and welcome, Jenah.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Jenah Thornborrow, and I am the Development Services Director for Garden City. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. And I, like Jason, work in tandem with our Garden City engineer. His name is Joe Canning. He is not on this meeting today. But one of my hats that I wear as well, I should say, is I'm the floodplain administrator for Garden City. Garden City regulations of the lower Boise River are centered around the floodplain, similar to Ada County. And really prior to dams, the reality of flood risk was a much more present reality. And individuals that were utilizing and users of the river within Garden City utilize the river in a much different way. For example, the Chinese farmers are a big part of Garden City's history, and they depended on the fertility of the soil related to the river flooding. But now there's 3 dams on place, and the users of the river are capitalizing on the river in a slightly different manner. They tend to be more concerned with recreation and the aesthetics of the river, and flooding is just an inconvenient possibility for those users. But it is still a possibility. The next few slides are just showing some high water years that happened on the lower Boise River. And those years, it should be noted, are far below the 100-year flood event. And this last slide is just noting that a big flood is still a reality on the lower Boise River. The operators of the dams, if they need to release high levels of water to really protect the valley, and at the end of the day, will do so. Similar to Ada County, Garden City participates in the National Flood Insurance Program. It's great that Jason went ahead of me, because he really did a great job describing a lot of what is entailed within the program. But the National Flood Insurance Program is where most of Garden City's regulations come from. And in this past June, the communities along the lower Boise River were required to update the flood insurance rate maps. And in doing so, I believe most of the communities went ahead and updated their ordinances as well. Garden City did for sure. But when the modeling for that flood insurance rate map came out, it showed all of this red that you're seeing on screen, or hopefully seeing on screen, was addition to the 100-year floodplain within Garden City. And so really what that showed us is that 3/4 of the city is within the 100-year floodplain or floodway. And some of the discrepancies between the two maps, in addition to demonstrating that Garden City has a much higher actual flood hazard risk within the city, it was really demonstrated that the city also has some economic impacts to consider. And the biggest economic impact comes from the flood insurance requirement for federally backed mortgages. So any home within the floodplain that has a federally backed mortgage is required to have floodplain insurance. And as Jason noted, how the structure is built really does affect the insurance rates. And so Garden City, being mostly built out, was looking at a number of structures, a huge part of the city that could have some economic impacts just based on the flood insurance requirements. And so Garden City worked with FEMA and is currently under something called seclusion. And what seclusion means is that the previous flood insurance rate maps from 2003 are the maps that Garden City is currently utilizing for regulatory purposes. While the city is exploring if the levies that were previously utilized to develop the model, the 2003 model, if they could be certified, or if there's an additional methods that Garden City could undertake to reduce the footprint of that 100-year floodplain. Garden City regulations are somewhat similar, but not exactly the same as Ada County's. The different areas that Garden City regulates akin to the counties are the 100-year floodplain and the floodway. Garden City also regulates the area directly adjacent to the bank of the river, 25 feet from the river, or the area between the greenbelt or nature path and the river, as well as access to the river. Similar to Ada County, there I liked how Jason explained it. Any man-made change within those areas are regulated by the city. So anywhere from actual structures to even recreation vehicles and the parking thereof. Within the 100-year floodplain, those reviews are done at a staff level review. The city planner and potentially city engineer, depending on the nature of the work, would be looking at those applications. Code specifies certain requirements within the application to ensure that all the documentation is there that's needed to review the applications. And at the end of the day, the city would issue a permit to do the requested work. And if it's a structure, more than likely you would receive an elevation certificate or possibly a floodproofing certificate. And just like Ada County, there is a process within the regulatory floodplain and floodway for letter of map changes. And those letter of map changes are really addressing the discrepancy on the flood insurance rate maps, either pre or post fill. And if those are accepted, it would eliminate the federal flood insurance requirements for the federally backed mortgages. Development within the floodway is something that can occur within Garden City. It's much more arduous of a process to undertake. It is a staff level review, and certainly the city engineer would do the heavy lifting on the review of any floodway development applications. The staff would send out notification at least to Idaho Department of Water Resources. It may also send out notification to other affected agencies. If it's work within the channel, Idaho Department of Lands, Army Corps, FEMA, and the Flood Control District may be notified depending on the nature of work. The application requirements are stringent. The applicant would need to either be able to demonstrate that there's a no rise based on a hydrologic and hydraulic analysis performed by a licensed engineer, or the other option is that the applicant could receive an approved FEMA conditional letter of map revision. If somebody chooses to go through that process, a permit would be received, and as noted in the previous slide, there is the ability potentially to do a letter of map change within the floodway. Floodway permits apply to virtually anything, whether it be a fence, whether it be a dock or a pier, roads, bridges, or sidewalks, for example. One of the Garden City specific criteria is a non-scientific designation of riparian area. Again, that's anything that's between the greenbelt or nature path and the river, or 25 feet from the river bank. There are certain things that individuals can do within that area. They can do minor pruning. So as long as it doesn't damage any plant or habitat or cause bank destabilization, and chemical use is restricted within that area. Staff can review permits within that area. If the city arborist identifies that there's a tree that's posing danger to life, limb, or property, there can be a permit that's issued for that. Or if individuals are hoping to remove invasive species or non-native species of plants and replace them with native or appropriate vegetation. We do have a list that we actually worked with Bryn and Dr. Roger Rosentreter in helping us identify what some appropriate plantings might be, and that's on our website. And then probably the most stringent permit process is any access to the Boise River. If there's a request to access the Boise River, lower Boise River, it triggers a public hearing process. And the vehicle that's utilized is called a conditional use permit. And there would be a public hearing with the Planning and Zoning Commission. But the city's code takes it one step further and says that the city council also needs to approve any request. The criteria that's spelled out in code is that it needs to be for the public, whether it's a public necessity, and code calls that out as bridges or water pumps, whether it's for public recreation. So the example code provides is the green belt, or wildlife habitat improvements. It would need to be demonstrated that it doesn't destabilize the banks of the river, and any other applicable application would need to be applied for. So obviously the riparian permit would need to be applied for and approved, and almost assuredly the floodway permit. There's one of two forms that you can find on our website as well to navigate the permits. Most everything is on one form, which is the floodplain floodway application. And then there's just different sections that show the different documentation that would be required. And then for anybody that's wishing to access the river, the conditional use permit is also process, and application forms are online. Probably the easiest way, if you're interested in more information, is to go to gardencityidaho.org, and right on the homepage, there's a floodplain icon that can take you to different information related to the floodplain within Garden City, and it also can take you to those permits. There's links to it. But if you want to go directly to the permits, you would go to under departments, development services, to planning, land use reviews, and then floodplain development. And with that, thank you very much. And at the end of everyone's presentations, I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jenna. That was really good information. Some of that was even new to me. So with that, thanks a lot. I'm going to move on to Liz. Liz, you're up with the Corps of Engineers.
Excellent. That's great. And go ahead and yep, excellent. All right. Well, I am not the Corps of Engineers. I think that you all know that. We invited the Corps and they weren't able to join us today, but we felt it was important to at least provide some basic understanding of what regulations and authority the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has. And they provided us with this little pocket guide. So I'm gonna go through it, but not in a whole lot of detail. And then I can put a link to it and some other resources as well. So again, I'm not representing the Corps today. And the Corps is a national, a federal agency, part of the Department of Defense. And you can see here that their regulatory program, that their mission is to protect the nation's aquatic resources while allowing reasonable development through fair, flexible, and balanced permit decisions. We're not going to go into all of their PR there. So for us here in the Lower Boise watershed, the Walla Walla district are the head honchos for, we are part of the Walla Walla district. And there is also, there's an office here in Boise though. So we do have people on the ground here in Boise. And the Corps has two main sections of law that they have jurisdiction over: Section 10 of the River and Harbors Act, Section 404 of the Clean Water Act. And there is a very complicated and controversial subject matter, which is, what does the Corps have jurisdiction over? What are those waters of the US? And I'm certainly not going to get into that today. And we could have them talk about that at another time if you're interested. But in general, rivers, streams, lakes, and ponds, swamps, marshes, and bogs, and wetlands. So the water, Section 10 is the structures in the navigable waters. Section 404 has a wider area of that it applies to, and areas that are connected to those navigable streams are included in that Section 404 jurisdiction. And here again, in the waters of the U.S., and you guys, I'm just not going to get into it, because if somebody wants to write in the chat about it and ask a specific question, but it's been in court a lot, to say the very least. But if you are doing work in areas where the Corps has jurisdiction, you are going to want to see if you need a 404 permit as well, and or a Section 10 permit. And there are two different types, main categories of permits. And this is pretty interesting. So there are general permits, and they can be nationwide, region-wide, or sort of subject matter related general permits. And those are, and that tries to make it easier for people who are doing this work. So the amount of information that needs to be provided and the scrutiny on it is a little bit less if your project falls under the definition of a general permit. And that would normally be something that's a little smaller in size and already determined to have a minimal effect on the environment, both individually and cumulatively. General permits, and when they say they're reevaluated at least every 5 years with a public notice, that means that the whole permit for the entire United States is looked at and evaluated. Now, just because they have, if you get a general permit because you have minimal impact, doesn't mean that there's no impact, and it doesn't mean that the permit doesn't have requirements in it, but the requirements are the same, or at least in most part are the same for all the projects with general permits. Individual permits, on the other hand, and they're on the general permit, there is they're noticed in the Federal Register or on the Army Corps page, and there is public comments are solicited and taken into account. Individual permits, so again, so it says these are projects that exceed thresholds, so maybe the size or the duration or the type of activity. And again, there's a public notice, and then the Corps solicits comments from the public, other federal, state, and tribal and local agencies. And there may have to be an environmental impact statement, NEPA regulations, federal NEPA regulations, if it's a major federal project associated with the project. You can see here that it says the project may be authorized as it's submitted by the applicant. It could be modified. Mitigation could be required that the applicant didn't already intend on doing. And the project can be denied based on environmental impacts or because it's contrary to the overall public interest. So there was a very high profile denial in the last about 6 weeks. If you know what it is, you can put it in the chat. And afterward, I can verify, in a few minutes here when I'm not talking anymore. But there was the Army Corps denied a very high profile permit, just not in Idaho, but I think this is so cute. What if I did work without a permit? Anyway, if you do work without a permit, you may have an enforcement action against you, or you you know, they say that you mitigation, restoration, or you can get an after the fact individual permit. I don't think anybody suggests that you do that. Joint application for permits. These are the kinds of things that you need to describe. You know, where is your project? Your mitigation plan? You know, do you need? Are you making having impacts that require mitigation? Anybody who's done this makes it look so simple. Oh, just do these 6 things. Anybody who's had to do this knows that it's not that simple. And let's see, you can see that, so it's the Boise office for the lower Boise River. And then they don't have the Boise River on their navigable waters. And I didn't quite understand that. Maybe somebody else wants to opine on that, but. And then they talk about a wetland. And that's a lot of the controversy over where the jurisdiction is. But so it says a major part is to determine which areas qualify for protection as wetlands. And so if there's any doubt, you know, the Army Corps, our people here will help you figure that out. And people make their careers over delineating wetlands. And so that's really good because the regulations help protect the health of the Boise River and other rivers in the United States. And they have this nice little section on mitigation. So, you know, if you are, you know, you have a way out. So if you are having, making damage, then you can mitigate to, you know, it says recapture aquatic resource functions lost through project impacts. This is great. They've got a picture of the Hyatt Hidden Lakes Reserve Mitigation Bank. And when ACHD built a new road that went through and impacted some wetlands. And then there was investment made at Hyatt Hidden Lakes Reserve to create more wetlands and improve the wetlands that were already there so that they were higher functioning. All right, let's see. Agency partners, lots of agency partners. The Corps definitely does not go alone on this one. And I'm sort of curious, they don't have Idaho Department of Environmental Quality on here, but Katie's gonna come up, you know, the other state agencies, but, and Katie will explain how they partner with the Corps. And there's their contact information. All right, did anybody put up what the high profile denial was? Let's see. Pebble Mine, ding, 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 you're a winner. That's right. Good job, Nancy. All right, Mike, back to you.
All right, Liz, thanks a lot. Really appreciate that. We're going to move right on to Kati Carberry. And after Katie is through, we're going to open a chat room up and see if we can get some answers out for some of the questions. Go right ahead, Katie.
All right, can everyone hear me okay?
You sound great.
Okay, perfect. I'm just gonna get my slideshow. There we go. Okay, so
that looks really good.
Okay, perfect. So my name is Kati Carberry, and I work for the Department of Environmental Quality, or DEQ, and I write the Section 401 water quality certifications for Idaho's Southwest region. So today I was going to focus on what 401 water quality certifications are and just kind of the process that an applicant goes through to obtain a certification. So this should tie into Liz's presentation of the Corps and how we coordinate with them pretty well. So Section 401 of the Clean Water Act requires a state water quality certification for any project that requires a federal permit for a discharge to a water of the U.S. So essentially, if it's a federal permit and there's a discharge to a water of the U.S. or a potential discharge, then the state of Idaho needs to certify that permit. And so a 401 water quality certification ensures that the federal permit is in compliance with Idaho's water quality standards and also our watershed plans. So I just kind of wanted to go over, so I'm going to go over the 4 major components that go into writing a 401 certification. And I don't have a ton of time, so I won't go into a whole lot of detail because each component could be an entire day or more. Like when we do water quality standards trainings, it's like a full week. So I apologize that it's not super in depth, but this is just to kind of give you an overview. And then if people have questions, they can always contact me about any of these components. But the first component is our anti-degradation piece. And this is kind of the first cut at protecting water quality. And so essentially Idaho's anti-degradation policy aims at protecting the existing water quality and maintaining water quality that is better than the minimum that's set by our water quality standards. So this is kind of the highest cut at our water quality. And then the second component that we look at is ensuring that Idaho's applicable water quality standards are met. And so you can go online and Google IDAPA 580102, and you can review all of Idaho's water quality standards. And I mean, they're kind of boring to read through, but I would recommend everyone that's interested in surface water quality in Idaho to just peruse through them and kind of learn what's in there, because that's the foundation for all the work that we do. And any kind of water quality impact always ties back to the water quality standards. So that's a really good place to start. And then we look at any applicable total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs, and that are in the watershed for the project. So a TMDL is basically a watershed plan that is used to address any identified pollutants in a water body. For example, there's a total phosphorus TMDL in the Boise River. So the TMDL prescribes how much phosphorus entities are allowed to discharge to the Boise River. So for example, all the wastewater treatment facilities received waste load allocations in the TMDL that limited how much phosphorus they each are allowed to discharge in their effluent. And so if there's a TMDL, we make sure that the federal permit has incorporated those limits that are addressed in the associated TMDL. And if they aren't incorporated into the permit, then we incorporate those into our 401 certification to ensure that the permittee is in compliance with our TMDLs or watershed plans. And then lastly, we have what are called special conditions. And special conditions are where we can add in conditions that ensure the permittee will be in compliance with our anti-degradation policy or our water quality standards, or any other associated TMDLs. And so an example of a special condition would be something like requiring additional monitoring for the project, or saying something like mitigation will be required if the monitoring demonstrates that there's a need. Let's see. So now that you have a tiny bit of background on Idaho's 401 water quality certifications and kind of the components that go into writing them, I was asked by Brenda to talk about what a person would need to obtain from DEQ if they were doing a project that involves the banks and shores of the Boise River. So I guess to be clear, without knowing the details of the project, there could be multiple things. So this is not an all-inclusive list, but because I have 10 minutes, I will give a very broad overview that kind of just gives the basics. So the first question would be, is there a direct pipe discharge that needs coverage under the Idaho Pollution Discharge Elimination System? That's like a mouthful. So that's IPDS. And so if the applicant will need to work, if the applicant needs an IPDS permit, then they need to work directly with our IPDS program, and they submit an application with them for that permit. And these permits don't require a 401 certification because they're not a federal permit and instead are being issued just by the state of Idaho. So I don't typically get too involved other than reviewing those IPDS permits and kind of doing some of the anti-DAG analyses, but other than that, there's no 401 cert needed. So then the second question would be, is the earth disturbing activity larger than 1 acre? And if it's larger than 1 acre, then that entity would need to obtain a construction general permit or a CGP, and EPA issues those. And so since it's a federal permit, the CGP is covered by DEQ's general certification, and that was issued in 2016. So they would not be required to obtain an individual certification from us for the construction activity, but they would need to follow Idaho's general certification guidelines for the CGP, or construction general permit. And if you're interested in looking at our general certification, that's on our website as well. And then the last question is kind of where I want to focus my discussion, because this is where it would likely trigger a 401 water quality certification for a proposed project on the bank of the Boise River. So you would ask, does the project need an Army Corps of Engineers 404 permit? And if so, will it be permitted as an individual permit, or will this be covered under a nationwide general permit? And so most of the nationwide permits are covered by DEQ's general water quality certification, and that was issued in 2017. And a copy of that general certification is on our website too, if you're interested. There's a few of our nationwide core permits that DEQ has denied or partially denied. And that's because our general cert didn't cover, like, the projects aren't uniform enough or something. There's a threshold in that nationwide that triggers an individual certification, because DEQ doesn't have the assurance that it's going to be alike all the other nationwides. And so if it's denied or partially denied, DEQ would need to write an individual certification for those. But in general, most of the nationwide permits will not require an individual certification. And then for larger projects, the Army Corps will typically require an individual permit, which then triggers DEQ's individual water quality certification. So to make this presentation more meaningful, I'm going to talk about obtaining an individual certification rather than it falling under our general cert, because that just kind of ends with the general cert that we've already written. So here's the timeline for the individual 401 certification process. So first, the applicant will need to contact DEQ and request what's called a pre-filing meeting for their project. And this is where DEQ and the applicant have the opportunity for a discussion about the details of the proposed project or anything that DEQ would like to see in their application. It's kind of an opportunity to talk openly about the project and discuss maybe any concerns that could be addressed in the application. And then from the date the applicant has requested the pre-filing meeting, they have to wait at least 30 days before they can submit a 401 water quality certification request. So these rules recently changed, and this became final in September of 2020. This whole process is pretty new, but you know, we're starting to get into it and getting used to it now, and so hopefully it'll start running really smooth. But it definitely it's changed the procedures and made it really specific. So that's why I'm kind of going into detail on this. So then the applicant can submit their request for a 401 certification, and DEQ will then review the request for the certification, and we make sure that all the requirements of the request have been met. And we have what's called a reasonable amount of time to complete the certification, but it can't be longer than a year. And so the federal agency that's writing the permit sets what they consider to be the reasonable amount of time. Typically, the Corps gives DEQ 60 days to complete a final certification, but the 60 days includes writing a draft certification and also allowing for a 21-day public comment period on the draft certification. And then once the public comments are received, we review all those public comments, revise the certification if it's warranted, and then we publish the final certification. So all of that has to happen within 60 days. That's typically what the Corps requires. So Did I skip? Oh yeah, I skipped. So this is a list of what is required for a request for certification. So the column on the left in blue is what the applicant must submit if the 401 certification is for an individual permit, and then the column on the right in yellow is what an applicant must submit if it's for a general permit. So I won't read through all of these, but you can see that we require information about the project and the potential discharges. And for an individual permit, we need more information about how they plan to monitor the discharge, and the equipment or measures planned to treat or control the discharge. And there's some additional information that we require for the individual permit. And so on a larger project, most of the time they're going to be submitting that column in blue. And so what we ask of the applicants is just that they include as much information as possible in the request, because that helps us when we're writing the certification. And without much time to write those, it's nice if we have kind of all the information up front before we begin the process. And so once we receive the request for certification, there are several options that we have. We can waive a certification, which I can say I've never seen that happen. I think, you know, if DEQ doesn't respond within a certain amount of time, it automatically waives it. I think if something fell through the cracks, that's the only reason we would ever waive. I've never seen that happen. We can request additional information to help with the analysis. But in general, if they've submitted all of those components in their request, then, you know, we can't really go back to them just as a time delay. It's got to be a real need. And then we can grant certification, or we can grant certification with conditions. Or last, we can deny a certification, but this has to be based on the project not being able to comply with our water quality requirements. It's really rare. I've only denied one my whole time and 6+ years working for the state. So, and that was because the mitigation plan didn't meet the rules. And so they were able to come back and revise their mitigation plan and provide a revised mitigation plan, and we were able to certify. But we rarely deny. I mean, that was one time that I've denied a project or an application, but then they came back and reapplied. So that's just not very typical. And then I just wanted to quickly go over the components of the 401 certification for an overview on a Boise River project, so you can kind of see how we would look at something that was being proposed on the Boise River. So first we would conduct the anti-degradation piece. And so I won't go into too much detail on this, but essentially the Boise River has impairments for total phosphorus, sediment, bacteria, and temperature. So typically our anti-degradation components for a Boise River project needs to ensure that any discharges meeting our water quality standards and that any existing uses are being maintained and protected. And then we would look deeply at our water quality standards to ensure that the project is able to comply with all of those. And then next we would ensure compliance with all of our TMDLs. And so the Boise River has approved TMDLs for phosphorus, sediment, and bacteria. And so we would make sure that those are being addressed in the permit, or we would add them in as conditions in our certification. And then lastly, we would include any special conditions, like I just mentioned, that may be needed based on the application that they submitted to us. So I just wanted to give everyone some useful DEQ links to keep informed if you guys are interested in our process. So the first link here you can use to subscribe to get updates on all our 401 certifications and any IPDS permit. And so you can click on that link, and then there's a button to subscribe to get updates, and it will automatically send you emails. And then the second link, you can subscribe again, and this is to get notifications on when public comments are open. And I guess I just want to encourage everyone to do that on when public comments are open, because think this is a direct way that you can help improve our certifications and the permits being written. I mean, oftentimes if we get comments, it brings up an angle or something in the certification or the permit that, you know, makes us think about a different side of things. So I encourage everyone to review and comment and participate in the public process. And then lastly, the link at the bottom is for public records request. So if there's anything that the public or entity or anyone would like to see as far as DEQ records or communications, they can submit a public records request, and then we will supply those records to you. I think that is it. And there's my contact information. I know that was really quick. I had a hard time like whittling this down. But if you have questions, you can always contact me. I'm happy to talk with anyone about the process.
All right, thanks, Katie. We really appreciate that. I think at this point, Liz, I'd like to turn it back to you and see if how you would like to handle the chat. There's quite a few things that come in on the chat that maybe you guys can figure out how you want to manage that.
Can do. Can do. Hey, thanks, Jason, Jenna, and Katie, and Mike. So you already know that the Corps wasn't able to be here today, and I got to do their little talk. And also Department of Water Resources wasn't able to be here today, and they have a very important stream channel alteration permitting process. And Idaho Department of Lands was also invited, and they were not able to come, and I'll put the link to their website in the chat. And then as Jason had talked about, also the FEMA contact for the state of Idaho, Maureen O'Shea, she works also out of the state office of IDWR. She's the state floodplain coordinator. All right, so questions. Yes, we had a few questions, and we have more questions coming in. Does somebody want to answer the question of, is there consistency between Ada County and Canyon County? Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I can answer that. So I will say most jurisdictions in the state have adopted a model code. Maureen was implemental and working on adopting a model code. And so it includes not only FEMA's base standards, but then some additional standards that make sense here in Idaho. And so generally, yes, there is consistency. However, some of the specifics and some of the higher standards may be different as far as the amount of freeboard, or just as we heard between Garden City and Ada County, the actual what is allowed in the floodway may be different as well. And so yes, there is some consistency. Is it exact? No, it wouldn't be exact.
Excellent. Here's a process question. When a water quality certification is required, can you submit the Section 404 permit to the Corps and submit a pre-filing request concurrently, or do you have to wait until the pre-filing timeline is complete to submit the permit for the 404?
I think I'm understanding this question. So essentially the applicant really needs to go to the Corps with their project before they come to DEQ, because if we don't need to do an individual certification, then they don't need to do a pre-filing meetings. They really need to coordinate with the Corps before they request a pre-filing meeting. But the permit's not going to be final until the 401 certification is complete. So they can submit their application, but you know, it's all kind of a package.
Thanks. And you can follow up with Katie if you need more information than that. There were some questions about jurisdiction. So Ada County and Canyon County have jurisdiction in the unincorporated areas of their counties, and then the cities have jurisdiction within the city boundaries. And so we have had a little questions going on about hunting regulations and building duck blinds and some of those sort of things. And so if it's within a city, then the city would have jurisdiction over those sort of building activities, along with potentially other state or federal agencies. But Fish and Game, Idaho Fish and Game Department regulates all of the hunting regulations, no matter if it's in a city or county. Let's see. I will try to get the PowerPoints and the notes if Jason, Jenna, and Katie can all share those with me. And I already shared the PDF from the core. And I will figure out a way to get those someplace where everybody can get them. Oh, so here's a question. Maybe you want to take this one, Jason. This is if one agency has jurisdiction on one side of the river and another has jurisdiction on the other side of the river, what kind of coordination happens? Oh, you wrote down the answer. What do you want to say? Do you want to talk about it?
Yeah, just real quickly, I can add there is agency coordination. And if you are making a change to the maps and submitting a letter of map revision to FEMA on a project that does impact this, they do require us to sign off on it and the city to sign off on it as well. And so we will do a detailed analysis from the county's perspective and the impacts on our side, as well as the city doing their review and the impacts on their side as well. So I think there's a great team of floodplain managers in the region. There's a lot of coordination, a lot of conversation about projects and just in general. It's a great group to work with.
And I want to second what Jason just said. And this is quite a great improvement from about 30 years ago or so, that we have many more trained floodplain managers, and that coordination is really awesome. I did want to just say that that there is a bit of a regulatory alphabet soup. It's complicated. We didn't even get to all the regulatory agencies today. But we want to applaud all the effort to protect the Boise River and our aquatic resources. And it's certainly not, Katie's, it's not the fault of our individual regulators that there's a lot of other regulations. And so these are awesome professionals that really are committed to doing a great job. And I just want to continue to encourage people to, if you do get a little frustrated with this kind of cumbersome system and kind of confusing, that we look to our professionals to be our allies in helping you figure it out, and not get too frustrated with them. Because sometimes it can be frustrating. Mike, do you want to have say the last couple words on permitting and how important it is? Let me say that I do hope that we'll be able to get the Corps, Department of Water Resources, and the Department of Lands, and we especially want to talk to the Department of Lands about public trust doctrine, and because those lands and below the high water mark in the bed of the Boise River are held in public trust. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I would just say that, it is it can be cumbersome sometimes to try to understand all the levels and everything of permitting, but we have to understand what's generated this exercise. And if we look just at the Boise Valley, the Treasure Valley area, look at the population explosion, you look at more and more people that are using the resources we have. We have to do everything we can to try to make those resources last and to stay as good as we can keep them. So we do need regulations, because we do have, we're human beings, and we can screw something up if we don't take care of it. So these rules and regulations are there for a purpose, even though they can be frustrating and cumbersome. As Liz said, the folks that are on today and work for the agencies, they're willing to reach out and help you if you ask them. So I found pretty good luck in just giving folks a call, and they'll help you work through the hard part of the system. So with that, I would just pass it back to Liz and just tell everybody thanks for the opportunity to talk today. If you go to Boise River Flood Control District 10 on Google, you'll find our website and all kinds of information on that, with more to come. Back to you, Liz.
That's great. Hey, Mike, thanks a million. Really appreciate your partnership today. Thanks you to everybody for coming today. Really appreciate your time over the lunch hour. Hope you had a good lunch while you were listening. And we hope to see you back here at the end of February to hear the story of Indian Creek. Take care.